When a 16-year-old student runs to his car after school, no one expects him to disappear for the next 6 hours. When they finally discover his fate, the shocking details will throw an entire town into a fit of angry protest. This is the fatal breakdown of Kyle Plush's death. It was just another day at Seven Hills High School for most of the teens just finishing up their day. After-school activities were getting started, and for some students, that meant a tennis match that would last well into the evening. Kyle Plush was excited about his match and looking forward to hanging out afterward to watch his friends play. At 3 o'clock as the school day ended, Kyle made his way out to his car to change shoes and grab his tennis gear. He was in 10th grade, so his parking space was in the sophomore parking lot, which was connected to the school thrift store. This was an unusual fundraising opportunity for the school, where people donated clothing and household goods, which were then sold to benefit school transportation and athletics. Kyle hopped in the front seat of his 2004 Honda Odyssey van. He put his backpack on the passenger seat and crawled back to get his gear from the trunk area. He went between the second row seats and then crawled over the third row seat to reach down and grab his shoe. What he didn't know was that the full-sized bench seat wasn't locked in. The spare tire was propped between the second row seats and kept the third row seat from clicking into its buckle. In this moment, he faced a truly unbelievable emergency as it flipped back against the back window. In a swift motion, the entire weight of the long bench seat was pressing his body against the rear hatch. Both of his arms were trapped against the window, and his hands were useless in the effort to free himself. The 80-pound seat was fully held up against his chest, and every breath required the use of muscles that were rarely used for regular breathing. Kyle was panicked. With a slight build, he was only 117 pounds and 5 foot 2 inches tall. Early in life, he suffered a spinal cord injury, which left him with physical challenges that limited his strength to free himself. Incredibly, the weight of his own body was pressing the seat firmly against the glass, and he had absolutely no leverage to swing the seat back to the upright position. He started using his legs to kick and drag against the roof, attempting to give him enough space to free one of his arms. This effort was just not working. Kyle was devastated to know that his cell phone was so close, but he couldn't bend his arms to properly pull it out and make a call. But Kyle was resourceful. He remembered that he might be able to summon Siri with voice commands if he could just yell loud enough for the phone to register his voice. He asked Siri to call 911. It was 3:14, and Kyle immediately started giving details about his situation. The phone wasn't close to his head, so he had no idea if anyone had actually answered. He continued to talk and not directly respond to the operator's questions. He gave her the most essential information first, that he was trapped in his van at Seven Hills High School.
Cincinnati 911, that is the address of your emergency. Cincinnati 911.
I'm trapped in my van outside the Seven Hills Hotel parking lot.
The Seven Hills what parking lot?
Help. I need help.
Where are you?
Hey, Siri.
Hello?
Hang up.
Hello?
Help. Help. Help.
Where are you? Hello?
After 3 agonizing minutes of back and forth, the call was disconnected. Kyle struggled and kicked, but there was no movement of the seat. He only hoped that the police had whatever information they needed to find him in time. He had been stuck in this position for about 5 minutes now, and it was clear that he was in a life-and-death struggle. Each minute was excruciating. He had to focus his energy on just breathing because his lungs had such a shallow depth of movement. Try breathing without expanding your chest, and it becomes clear that the very small volume of air that he was able to move in and out would not supply enough oxygen to survive. He knew that he was in extreme danger of dying, and no sirens could be heard coming in his direction. He was desperate for help, but unfortunately no one was around him in the lot at that time. His van was backed into his spot, so from a distance, no one would be able to see his body pressed against the window. It was now 3:35, and Kyle was able to connect another call to 911 using Siri. At this point, More than 20 minutes had passed in this devastating position. He spoke in broken breaths, but gave detail after detail about the make, model, and color of his van. He repeated where he was located and expressed the near-death condition he was in. He told the operator that he wasn't going to make it much longer and to please tell his mom that he loved her if he died.
I probably don't have much time left to tell my mom that I love her if I die. This is not a joke. This is not a joke. I'm trapped inside my gold Honda Odyssey van in the software parking lot of Seven Hills Beth. Send officers immediately. I'm almost dead.
For the operator, that single shocking statement should have elevated the nature of the emergency. Kyle couldn't hear anything from the other end of the call, but he just had to have faith that they were sending help right away. What Kyle didn't know was that they didn't understand the emergency that he was facing, and no one would be coming to help him. At the 911 call center in Cincinnati, Ohio, there had been a number of troublesome problems over the past few weeks. Due to construction, their call center had been relocated to an off-site location, and calls were harder to hear. The computer system didn't seem to be operating properly, and CAD software often froze when the operator was trying to enter call details to send over to police or fire departments. The CAD system was the computer-aided dispatch system, which allowed the call takers to send details of the call over to the dispatcher. The dispatcher would then assign a call to particular police or fire services. While the call taker continued to collect information, police could start heading to the location. Everything entered into the system would be transmitted to the officers so that they would be well informed by the time they arrived on scene. Stephanie McGee took the call that came in at 3:14 on April 10, 2018. An automated message played for the first few seconds when a call was answered, and the caller was talking over the message. Stephanie had a hard time hearing the caller, so she continued to ask questions about the location and nature of the emergency. From what she could tell, it sounded like an older woman asking for help, saying that she was stuck in her car in the school parking lot. Despite asking several questions, it didn't appear that the caller could hear her. She was clear that someone was stuck or trapped, but wasn't alarmed at the level of danger. After 3 minutes of listening to the caller ask for help, the call disconnected. Stephanie called the number back, but only got the voicemail of a boy named Kyle. They questioned whether it was a joke or not, but she had location data showing that the caller was at Seven Hills High School. Inexplicably, she waited 4 more minutes to start entering the information into the CAD system to alert dispatchers that help was needed. She had a choice of how to mark the call. In one case, she could identify it as a request for rescue, where both police and fire would be dispatched to the scene, or she could call it unknown trouble, to have the police head over to check it out. She chose the latter. This was the first crucial mistake. Kyle called 911 at 3:14, and it was now 3:21 when the first dispatch finally went out. She listed the call as unknown trouble and gave details that a woman was stuck inside her van in Seven Hills parking lot, with an unknown notation of Phase 2. She followed that up with more precise location information, as possibly in the thrift store parking lot. Kyle had said he desperately needed help at least 17 times, and that he was going to die soon. Banging could be heard on the call, and he clearly sounded in distress. But Stephanie didn't include any of this information in her notes, even though 2 other call takers listened to the call and heard Kyle say, "Help me, I'm going to die." Officers Osborne and Brazil were dispatched to the call. The officers thought a lady had her doors locked or some other mishap that could be easily solved. They pulled into Seven Hills High School at 3:26, just 5 minutes after receiving the dispatch, and turned on their body cameras. They drove down the main street and pulled into the thrift store parking lot. They drove up a row of cars, then pulled out to another part of the parking lot. They weren't certain what exactly they were looking for, but tried to find a van with a woman inside. They didn't really see anything, but they certainly weren't alerted to the true level of the emergency. The officers were listening to music and eating lunch. They probably thought the woman got her doors opened and all had been resolved. They stopped to ask the traffic officer if he had seen anything unusual, but he had not. Without exiting the car once, they closed the call at 3:37, just 11 minutes after their arrival. They thought that the call had likely been a prank.
imagine I would.
With the information they had, there wasn't any reason to be overly alarmed. What they didn't know was that at that very moment, Kyle was on the phone with 911 again, pleading for someone to come save his life. By 3:35, Kyle had been struggling for more than 20 minutes to free himself, with no sign of rescue. He called 911 again with the Siri function, and a different operator answered this time. Amber Smith heard someone asking for help in the Seven Hills parking lot. Amber was having trouble hearing the caller, so in a completely inexplicable action, she pushed the TTY function. This was part of the system enabled for hearing-impaired callers, which allowed the touch-tone system to be used to share their emergency information.
I can't hear what you're saying. Just send quickly.
When this function was activated, the volume of the call went down by 75%. Amber admits being aware that this would happen. She labeled the call as a silent call, even though she clearly heard the request for help in the beginning of the call. During the 3 minutes that she had Kyle on the line, she couldn't really hear the faint volume of information that he was relaying. Finally, she decided to disconnect the call and hears him saying, "Hey Siri," as she hangs up.
Hey Siri. Hey Siri. Hey Siri. Hey Siri. Hey Siri.
It clearly was not a silent call from someone who was hearing impaired. There was someone trying to get help, and they had been on the line with her for 3 minutes pleading for help. So what did Amber do after disconnecting the call? Nothing. The CAD system was frozen, so she was unable to enter the information directly. If it froze, she was supposed to notify a supervisor to enter it manually. But she notified no one. Even though it was standard practice, she doesn't replay the crucial 3-minute call recording to listen to what he might have said. She knew there had been another call from this person just a few minutes before, but she didn't tell the original call taker that they had called back. The dispatchers had no idea that there was ever a second call. She just did nothing. At that very moment, officers were pulling out of the school parking lot, closing out the call. Kyle was starting to fade, but was still desperately trying to get help. For the next 5 minutes, he tried to use Siri to call members of his family, but none of the attempts were successful. At 3:44, the deputy directing traffic looked at the call information and was confused by the Phase 2 notation. He called dispatch to ask what Phase 2 meant. They let him know that it was a code to indicate that there was reasonably precise location information detected by the GPS system. This meant that GPS coordinates were available to mark the location of the caller, and it was reasonably accurate. Unfortunately, the officers were completely unaware of the meaning of Phase 2, and neither of them bothered to ask. After the dispatcher explained what it meant, she failed to give him the GPS location of the incident. The traffic officer hung up and left the campus. No one went to the location of the GPS coordinates given by the system. A pin dropped at this address is located just a few parking spots from the location of Kyle's van. It's unknown exactly how many more minutes Kyle struggled to free himself, but the attempts to call Siri stopped at 3:43, 30 minutes after he became trapped. Kyle's parents were starting to get worried when he wasn't home after 7 p.m. His mother Jill called his phone and checked his Life 360. It was clear that his phone was in his car at school, probably in his backpack. She called another friend, who told her not to worry, that the kids liked to stick around to watch each other's matches. After another hour or so had passed, Kyle's father Ron decided to run up to the school to make sure everything was okay. He pulled up to see Kyle's van backed into his spot in the sophomore parking lot. Everyone else was gone at this point. It was now nearly 9 p.m. He instantly felt dread that maybe Kyle had been kidnapped, with his vehicle and phone still just sitting there. He looked in the front to see Kyle's tennis racket and backpack. Then a turn of his head revealed the horror that no parent can possibly imagine. After receiving help from a school employee, they removed Kyle and attempted CPR. Tragically, he was already gone. After getting a 911 call for help at 9 p.m., the 3 related calls were put together to show a clear picture of what had happened. The second call that Kyle had made had every piece of information needed to save his life. If only that call had been replayed by Amber Smith. She would have heard that he was pleading for help and knew that he was dying. He clearly stated that he was stuck in his gold Honda Odyssey van in the school parking lot. In the aftermath of Kyle's death, investigations were performed by the city. They determined that there was no wrongdoing on the part of the officers or the dispatchers. It felt like an unreal outcome. The city of Cincinnati was outraged. There were clearly things that could be done to improve this system. It had long been understood that there were clear problems in how the emergency call center had been handled over the years. Kyle's family filed a lawsuit against the city and eventually won a $6 million settlement. More importantly, they fought for changes to be made in the way calls are dispatched, rules and requirements for training, and automatic GPS mapping in officers' cars to assist in locating the source of calls. Jill and Ron Plush have started a foundation in Kyle's honor to promote technology, volunteerism, and well-being for first responders and dispatchers.